Okay, so I apologize for being a little bit late, starting a couple minutes late, but I did print out your most recent grade sheets, and I had them all printed out, and I gave it to a couple students, and they realized, or they caught a mistake, so I had to fix the mistake and reprint them all. So I don't think there's any mistakes anymore, but it happened on everybody, so I had to reprint everybody's. So today we're on exercise and/or lecture 118, and what we're doing today is we're switching from the world of Illustrator into the world of AutoCAD. And it took me a long time to convince the powers that be that AutoCAD was a good idea in this class. But I think it's important for you to get the basics of AutoCAD before you get too heavily into 121. And I know a lot of you are already in 121, but when you get to your final project, you're going to have to do some laser cutting. You're really going to need AutoCAD. And it's going to make your life a lot easier if you have some AutoCAD in your back pocket to be able to use. AutoCAD is unfortunately one of the more complicated programs that architects and designers tend to use, and it has probably the highest learning curve of all of them. Well, Rhino is similar in terms of learning curve, so I will do my best to distill it down in a simple way of kind of getting the basics to have something in AutoCAD. That being said, it's in all likelihood in your best interest to take a full AutoCAD course at some point. Unfortunately, AutoCAD courses don't necessarily cover exactly how architects use AutoCAD, but they'll give you enough to really feel comfortable figuring out how to use AutoCAD as an architect. And so there's some intricacies that we'll get into a little bit. How many people have used AutoCAD before or feel comfortable in AutoCAD already? Okay, a few of you are admitting to it. I suspect that several of the beginning exercises in AutoCAD will seem very easy to you because you've done it before. If you haven't ever touched AutoCAD or opened it, that's perfectly okay, and we're gonna learn something. I would also say that those of you that feel very fluent in AutoCAD, I bet there are still some things that I can add that you don't know that are in AutoCAD that will help you out a great deal. So what I've tried to do in this AutoCAD section is I've tried to pull out what I think is the absolute most critical stuff that you know relating to AutoCAD, and that's what we're going to cover. There is, of course, a lot more in AutoCAD and in Rhino that you'll need to know as you go forward. If you've worked in Rhino at all, or have done any 3D modeling, or have taken 136, you'll find that AutoCAD and Rhino work very, very similarly. And so if you're fluent in Rhino, learning AutoCAD will be really quick. Those of you that are in 136 right now, you'll find that picking up AutoCAD is faster. Likewise, if you know AutoCAD really well and you end up in 136 and you're taking Rhino, it'll be an easy transition. So the two do work very well hand in hand. So we're going to go ahead and open up AutoCAD. Your computers have AutoCAD 2016. My computer has AutoCAD 2015. Go figure. But they'll essentially look the same regardless of which one you open. You're more than welcome to work in 2016 because it will. It's the most current version. So when you first open AutoCAD, the other thing I should say is people love to customize AutoCAD. And so if you're on one of these machines and it hasn't been freshly restarted, chances are if anybody's worked in AutoCAD, they've customized some setting. And it can drive you nuts if you get used to some setting and then it's not there, or vice versa. And so I recommend before you guys start AutoCAD, you restart the computers. You guys are in this class at the end of the day, so there's a pretty good chance that somebody else has messed with AutoCAD before you come in here. So restarting is not a bad idea, but since we're already up and running, we're going to go with it for today. But in the future, when you first come in, restart your computers because that way you know you get a fresh AutoCAD. So when I first start up AutoCAD, I get this little startup window that will let us kind of establish a few of the default settings. It really doesn't give us a lot of options. In the world of InDesign or Illustrator, we do a lot of settings in this first startup screen. This basically gives us almost nothing. Other than we're going to say that, yes, my units are in feet and inches, which is fine, and we'll go ahead and say OK. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through the bulk of what the Autocad interface looks like and what happens within AutoCAD. Again, if you feel comfortable in AutoCAD, this is definitely a retread of instruction. But at the same time, for those of you that have never seen this before, we have to kind of talk through it a little bit. Up here at the very top, we have our basic save, or excuse me, new, save, new, open, save, plot, or print. AutoCAD calls printing plotting because generally speaking you're going to plot to a plotter, which is a big format printer, instead of a printer. Does that mean you can't print to a laser printer or one of the normal printers? No, of course you can print to the normal printers. They just call it plotting instead of printing. Go figure. The other thing is right here at the top you see something that's called drafting and annotation. Hopefully it's kind of cut off on my projector screen here. The drafting and annotation drop-down is a lot like picking essentials or typography or whatever. It's a workspace, just like in Photoshop, InDesign, and Illustrator there are these workspaces. Drafting and annotation is the AutoCAD workspace for 2D drawing. And so that's the workspace we're going to be in. If you are mistakenly in one of the other workspaces like 3D Basics, you'll get a completely different set of tools and it won't look right. So you want to make sure that you are in drafting and annotation. And again, if you had a fresh restart, it should end up that way. So we're in drafting and annotation mode. Below that, we have, and you gotta love this. Do you guys have the file menus and stuff below that or not? This morning I had the file menus right above this, but of course it's gone now because I didn't restart my computer. Somebody, do you have file save and that kind of thing or not? Let me take a quick look. It's hard. I should have made you all restart the computers before. It's, oh great. Can you get it from here? There. It's under workspace. Yeah, see, this is exactly what I was telling you. Stuff gets messed up when you don't have a restart. So I've got several people that are in the same boat. If you're missing this little menu to be able to even select drafting and annotation mode, if you click the little triangle at the end of the road here, you can choose what you're seeing. And so if you don't have workspace checked, it would look like this, and then you can't pick that, yes, you want drafting and annotation. So we'll go ahead and check that to worksheet, and then you see workspace, and then you can see drafting and annotation. I apologize. Again, fresh restart would have been a smart move on all our parts. But I don't want to have everybody do that because then we'd sit here for 10 minutes while the computer's booted back up. OK, so below that we have what AutoCAD calls its ribbon. And for those of you who learned AutoCAD a long time ago, this looks incredibly foreign. But this is what they consider to be a summary of the most frequently used things. And so for the most part in this class, that's all we need. And so if you have your home ribbon current or on top, notice that I can switch to one of these other ribbons if I wanted to. If I have the home ribbon, it's broken into sections. The first section here is draw. The next section is modify. The third section is annotation. We're not going to do any annotation in this class because it's too far of an advanced topic. So we're going to skip annotation. Next, we have layers, which we will talk about, and organizing your drawing. Then we come over to blocks, again, something we won't talk about in this class. Then we turn into properties here, which have to do with line weights, colors, line types, etc. We will talk about those in this class. Then we move into groups, measure, clipboard, and view. Those are much less common. So for today, what we're going to primarily concentrate on is the draw and modify sections. Almost everything that we'll do will have a button that's available here for us to pick. There are more buttons that are hidden underneath. If you were to click on, say, the modify, there's other little buttons that are available there. If you don't recognize what those buttons are, it's not the end of the world because I will walk you through how to get to something specific. So below that, we have our drawing that is open. And you see this big black space that's available for us to draw on. And so in Autodesk's infinite wisdom, way back when, they realized that people that draw in the world of AutoCAD tend to sit at the computer for hours and hours and hours and hours. And so because we do that, they decided to flip the drawing space so that when we're drawing, we draw on a black background with white lines. And it's a lot easier for our eyes to not get tired and to stare at the screen for long periods of time when it's this way. And so it's just something that you kind of get used to in AutoCAD. It's the nature of drawing. When you go to print something, it will automatically reverse. So the black background will become white, your white lines will become black. And that's just kind of the nature of things. And so that is the workspace. That is where we're actually going to do our drawing. Below that is something that looks like a white bar that kind of runs across the top of the bottom of the page here. And if you look carefully, it says type a command in it. This could be nested at the bottom of the page. It could be floating up here a little bit. Or it could even be, like it was on mine initially, docked in so that it runs all the way across the bottom of the page. It is entirely up to you what feels right. Generally, the default is that it's sitting right here at the bottom of the page like that. But again, it doesn't matter where it is. This thing is called the command line. And so for programs like AutoCAD and for Rhino, this command line allows us to, using the keyboard, interact with this piece of software. And so we could type in any command that we could pick with a button. So much like in the world of Illustrator or Photoshop, we can use shortcuts to do certain things, like Control-0 or plus or minus. Most of the AutoCAD commands are actually available in here, but it's far more extensive. We're not limited to Control-C, Control-V for copy and paste. We can actually type copy, paste, and there's a bunch of different copy commands. And so we'll talk a little bit more extensively about the command line as I'm going forward, but that's something that you want to reference and kind of pay attention to. Below the command line, at the very bottom bar, we have something called model, which is behind my head right now. But that model just means that we're working in model space. That's what we are going to typically be in. We'll get to what layouts mean and how to work in layouts a little bit later on in the course. On the right-hand side here, we have a bunch of toggles that are either on or off. And when they're on, they're kind of highlighted in blue. And when they're off, they're white. Not all of your computers will show everything all at once. It depends on who customized something before you. The thing for today that we want to worry about is something called dynamic input, and we're going to be toggling that on and off. It looks like a plus sign with a little box underneath it. It's right here. So if I were to draw it, I'm having a terrible time with pens and stuff today because none of them want to work. But it looks like a little icon that's like a plus sign like this with a little box underneath it that's filled in. We don't have it. Okay, if you don't have it, which is perfectly okay, there's at the very bottom right corner, there's 3 lines. Click on those 3 lines and check the box for dynamic input. And when you check that box, the little dynamic input tool will show up. Okay, so you want to make sure there's a check next to dynamic input. Okay? So down here, that little plus sign with the box underneath it, we want to turn it off, so we want to make it white before we start doing any drawing. Okay? Long term, you're going to end up having that on, but I want to explain some stuff about AutoCAD, and it's easier to explain if that's off for right now. Okay, so at this point, we've kind of walked through what's happening in the AutoCAD interface, and now it's time to actually start drawing something. And so before we really get into drawing, the first thing to always confirm is that your units are set correctly as part of AutoCAD. And so you know that when we created the new document, we said we wanted it to be in feet and inches. Unfortunately, that doesn't convert it into the normal feet and inches that we're used to. It's decimal feet and inches, which really doesn't help us. So I'm going to type right now units. And you'll see that when I type units, it shows up in this little command line at the bottom. And after I've typed units, I'll press enter, and that will bring up a little dialog box that lets me change the units. This, by the way, is written out under part 1, the first bullet point. It says what to type in, so if you get lost, it is right there, and you can refer to it. I'm going to change the length type from decimal to be architectural, which will then allow me to input feet and inches. Okay? So once that says architectural, I'll go ahead and say OK, and I'm done with units. So now it's a matter of starting to draw. And the major difference between AutoCAD and, say, Illustrator, right, they're both vector graphics programs, is that AutoCAD has everything to do with scale and dimension. thus far in the world of Illustrator, we were just drawing kind of on a piece of paper. And we didn't pay much attention to the size of an object. We just kind of did what looked good. In the world of AutoCAD, we're not going to draw just kind of arbitrary lines. We're going to imagine this as if it were full scale. So when I would draw, if I draw a floor plan, if I draw a house, the lines that I draw are actually the real size of the house. I don't do any scaling in my head. If the wall is 24 feet long, it's 24 feet in AutoCAD. So everything's full-sized, and we're actually going to pay attention to dimensions. So because of that, AutoCAD is set up very much like if you go way back in time to when you took algebra or algebra 1 or 2 or whatever. We had to do basic graphing. Do you guys kind of remember that when we had an x and a y coordinate and whatever? AutoCAD is set up very much the same way. So in the world of AutoCAD, we have, let me find my, orange is the only color that works. So I have to keep track of the orange pen. We have an x and a y, and I know it's a little hard for you guys to see. Okay, we have an x and a y axis, and you kind of remember this for math, and you had to like count out, like, oh, this is 1, this is 2. So if we had a coordinate that was like 2, 3, right? We'd count over 1, 2, and then we count up 1, 2, 3, and right there would be our point. Does that kind of make sense? X first, then y. Vaguely remember that a little bit? Okay, the good news is AutoCAD doesn't require that much math, but it is based on this coordinate system, as if we had an x and a y, and that means that we start at a point called 0, 0. Right? So this is 0, 0. So when I start to draw, I can use these coordinates to actually input data into the computer. So we're going to start our drawing at point 0, 0. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come and I'm going to pick the Polyline tool, which is right here. It's the second big button. I could also type on the command line P line for Polyline. And I should notice, or should point out, that when you hover your mouse over one of these buttons before you click, if you leave it there long enough, you get some information about the particular tool that you're going to use. It's a little heads-up display. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Polyline. And you see down here in the command line it says P line specify start point. So at this point, I can actually type in a value or a spot where I want to start. So I'm going to type 0, 0. Oops, if I can type 0, 0. And that is the coordinate of the origin. And when I enter, you see that my line starts right where x and y cross. So you see a little graphic here that are x and y, and my coordinate starts right there. Okay? From here, I'm going to type in a next coordinate. And so in this sense, I'm starting at point 0, 0, and I want a line that goes up the y-axis 24 feet. So I want to come up here 24 feet. So the coordinate for that point is 0 along the x, 24 feet. So this would be 0, 24 feet as a coordinate. So I'm going to type in 0, 24, and then the little apostrophe sign. 0, 24, and then the apostrophe sign for feet, and then I'll press enter. And it will draw a line that is 24 feet long straight up. Now, unfortunately, AutoCAD, by its default, won't let us zoom out far enough to see the line. It thinks we're drawing something too small. So at this point, I'll go ahead and press enter, which finishes the command. And then I'm going to press Z for zoom, and I'll press enter, and then I'll press E for extents, and I'll press enter. And at this point, I'm now zoomed out to where I can see my 24-foot line right there. And I apologize you have to do that. I wish AutoCAD would just let us zoom out far enough to begin with. So I'll come back to my Polyline tool, and I'm going to start right where I stopped, so right at this point. Notice that there's a little green square that shows up. That's called an object snap, and it means that I'll start where that last point was. If the green square doesn't show up, you want to make sure that your object snap is turned on. It's a little rectangle with a green dot in the corner, down at the bottom. Okay? And that means that when I hover over the end of this mouse, I get a little green square, and I can click to start right from where I left off. Okay? So now I can continue typing in, and I'm going to do this several times. So if I lose you a little bit, we can start again. Yeah, it has to be blue to be on. Go to Polyline. Move over to the end. There you go. OK, so I'm going to start at this last point. And like I said, I'm going to go over this several times. So if you get a little bit lost, don't worry. Hang in there. I know this is a lot to take in the first time. And that's why people that have worked in AutoCAD before are going to be really annoyed with me as I go through this, because I'm going to repeat. But it's the nature of you got to start somewhere. You have to start learning somewhere. OK? So I've started at that point that I left off. And now I'm going to type in the next coordinate. And the next point that I want to do is I want to go over from where I was. So I'm at point 0, 24, and I want to come over here, right, to a point that is 12 feet over and 24 feet up. So this is going to be 12 feet, comma, 24 feet as my next coordinate. So I'll go ahead and type in 12 feet, comma, 24 feet, and then enter. And you see that I've now created the next segment of my line. So at this point, I could continue, and I want to go down by 6 feet. And so I could say 12 feet, comma, 18 feet as my next coordinate. But sometimes when you start to get too far, I mean, the first one is easy. It's on the x-axis. The next one's still pretty easy because it's going straight across. But sometimes when you're coming out here, unless your brain is really mathematical and you're used to graphing and stuff, it gets a little bit hard to keep track of. And so we can use, instead of what's called an absolute coordinate, which means the 0, 0 is at the origin of x, y, we can use something called a relative coordinate. And a relative coordinate resets x and y to start from the last point you clicked. So in this case, it would start from right here, and I can now reorient from this location. And so instead of typing just the value, so let's say I want to go down by 6 feet, the coordinate value would be 0, comma, negative 6 feet. But to tell AutoCAD that this is relative to the last point that I clicked, I'm going to use the @ sign, like the email sign. So I'll say @ and this time it'll be 0, comma, negative 6 feet, which just means go straight down 6 feet. And I'll go ahead and hit enter. Okay, so again, I want to go over 12 feet, but I want it to be relative to that last point that I clicked. So I'll say at 12 feet, comma, 0, and I'll go ahead and hit enter. And I'll draw straight out by 12 feet. Now I want to go down by 12 feet, so this would be at 0, comma, negative 12 feet. So remember, it's always x first, then y. I'll press enter. There it is. And now I want to go back here. And so once again, it would be at negative 12, comma, negative 12 feet, comma, 0. Enter. Oops, I did 12 inches, sorry. At negative 12 feet, comma, 0. Enter. There it is. Now I can switch back into using my absolute coordinates again. So in this case, it would be 12 feet, comma, 0, no @ sign. Feet, comma, 0, no @ sign. I can switch right back. And then I could type C to close the shape. Oops, sorry. Oh, there you go. I messed it up. I told you I was going to redo this several times, right? So here we go. We're going to redo it again. Let me start all the way back at the beginning at point 0, 0. So I'll start with 0, comma, 0. And I'll start with these absolute coordinates first. So again, straight up, so 0 in the x, straight up in the y by 24 feet. So 0, comma, 24 feet, enter. And then the next one is going to be we're going regular coordinates 12 feet, comma, 24 feet for that next point. Then we'll switch over to relative. So I'll say at 0, comma, negative 6 feet. Next one would be at 12 feet, comma, 0. Notice that when I type in 0, I don't actually have to put feet because 0 feet is the same as 0 inches. So we'll say at negative 12 feet, comma, 0. nope, that was wrong. Excuse me, at 0, negative 12 feet. There. We'll switch back into absolute coordinates. So this would be 12 feet, 6 feet. So we'll do 12 feet, 6 feet. This would be 12 feet, 0. And then I can come back and finish the shape like that. Okay? So we've gone through and we've talked about absolute coordinates and relative coordinates. And there are times where you really want to use these because it's convenient. You know where the line wants to go, and you can draw it that way. There is, however, something called dynamic input that you can put on that is aimed at making your life a little bit easier. And so at this point, we're going to turn that button for dynamic input back on. And now that it's back on, we're going to start drawing again. And I'm going to draw over here to the right as my example here. And this time, I'll start with the polyline, and I'm not going to be concerned with where I click to start. When I click, you can see that it's giving me a line that's going up and a length that's highlighted in blue. I can type in a value for that length. Notice that it's also giving me an angle. So I have an angle of 92 degrees. So I'm not quite at 90 degrees and that length. So I want to be at 90 degrees. And what I'm going to turn on to make sure that I'm at 90 degrees is something called Ortho. And it's a little right angle icon that's down here at the bottom. Restrict cursor orthogonally. And I'll go ahead and turn that on, and you can see that I'm limited to being at 90 or at 0 or at 180 or at 270. So I'm stuck in those basic. But now, when I'm going up, I can type in the value of 24 feet. And I don't have to know what that coordinate is. I just type in a value. Now I can go over by 12 feet. And I can go down by 6 feet. And I can go over by 12 feet. And so you can see that this is an easy way of drawing because you're just typing in the lengths of the lines and kind of following along. So this would be 12 feet again. This would be 12 feet. This would be 6 feet. And then I'd come back to the start. So it ends up being a fairly easy way of working through to have that on. The other thing that I like about dynamic input is when we're in the middle of a command, it's going to prompt us for more information right next to our cursor instead of having to look down at the command line. For those of us that learned AutoCAD a long time ago, we're used to looking at the command line anyway, so we glance down there. But the dynamic input can be helpful when you're working through that. The other thing that dynamic input allows us to do is not only can we specify, let's say I start here, not only can we specify a length, but I can also specify the angle. So if, for example, I wanted to draw a line that was on 45 degrees, I can press the Tab key to switch fields. So I'm going to switch. See how the blue is highlighted in the length right now? If I press Tab, it'll switch to being the angle. And I could type, say, 45, and then I'll press Tab, and now I'm restricted to only drawing at 45 degrees. And so I could type my 24 feet that way. And then I wanted to draw the next one, so I could do a Tab, and we'll go into negative 45. And we're going down this direction. And so I could type 12 feet. But you see how I'm restricted to those angles instead of being restricted to the just the right and the left. So I'm going to go ahead and escape to get out of that. And we can go ahead and delete this because those don't really matter. All right. So let me go ahead and get rid of this extra shape. And I'm going to go back to the one that is the first shape. And so ultimately, what we're going to be creating is what's on the back. There's a little floor plan on the back, 2-room building, not particularly advanced or adventurous in its design, but at the same time, it's a good place to start with some basic AutoCAD skills. So what I have is I have a line that goes all the way around the outside of this building. And I want this line to have a second line to represent the thickness of a wall. Right? So if we imagine this as a building, or as a floor plan to the building, the wall is going to have some thickness. And so I'm going to have to do that. The easiest way for me to do that is to use a command that's called offset. And it takes one line and it offsets that line a certain distance from the original line. And so if I look up here, we've done draw so far. But if I come over to modify, Right? In the bottom right corner of Modify, there's a little icon that kind of looks like a cloud with a blue line around it. That's called the Offset tool. So I can click on Offset, and I can start. The other thing that I can do is I can type into this command line Offset and hit Enter, which does the exact same thing as picking the button. And so for people that become more and more proficient in the world of AutoCAD, you have a tendency to use more command line, more keyboard input than actually hunting for and picking a button. And so it tends to be a little bit more efficient to work from the command line. But it takes practice to get used to the command line and how you work with it. So first thing that my contextually aware, my dynamic input is telling me is to specify the offset distance. So I'm reading right next to my cursor. It's prompting me for information. It is also down here at the command line prompting me for the same thing. Okay, so I can look in either place. And the offset distance is going to be 6 inches. Now, if this were a construction class or something about materials, we might have an argument about what the thickness of a wall really is. But for the context of this class, we're using round numbers. We're going to use 6 inches. So I'll go ahead and press Enter for 6 inches. And I look there, and it's asking me for another piece of information. And that is to select the object to offset. And so this is the curve or the line or the shape that I want to offset. So I'm going to pick the shape here. And it highlights in blue. And then it says specify a point on the side to offset. Or there's more options. Okay? For right now, I want to specify not on the outside, but on the inside of this shape. And when I do that, and I click on the inside, you see it makes a second version of my line that is exactly 6 inches from the first toward the inside. Now I could continue if I wanted to offset more times and just pick the line over and over again, and I could ultimately end up with a bunch of versions of this line offsetting. Now obviously I didn't want to do that. I don't have walls that look like that, so we can select these, and I'll press the delete key. But it shows you how offset works. Obviously I could also specify a different distance if I wanted an offset at a different distance. We'll do that in just a second. So I now have my building with a set of walls that work around the outside of the building. It's now time to start to work to create some of the openings that would be in the wall. And so I'll start creating the door that's on the top of this wall. Okay? And this door is 3 feet, and it happens to be in the center of this wall. So the first thing that I need to do when I'm creating this door is I have to start and create the opening for the door in the center of this wall. So I'm going to use my object snaps. And my snaps are already on. And chances are, if you're in the default snaps, your midpoint snap is on. And I can confirm that by clicking the little triangle next to my object snaps and confirming that there is a check mark right here next to midpoint, okay, which should be on by default. When I have the midpoint checked and I pick the Polyline Tool, when I move my mouse to the center of this line, see how I get a little green triangle? That's the symbol for midpoint, and that means that I'm going to snap to that midpoint. And so I can just snap from one triangle to the other triangle and press Enter, and I create a line right at the middle. Okay? So let me show you an illustration. If I had snap turned off, even if I knew, oh, well, I know exactly where this is going to be, I'm just going to come in here and I'll line up my mouse like this, and that looks like it's dead on, right? You would agree? So I'll go ahead and click, and then I'll come up here and I'll go ahead and click right where I think that is exactly right there. Okay? And I'll click, and I'll be done. Enter. But if I were to zoom in, right, still looks okay. Oh, wait a minute, it's looking a little bit off. Let me keep zooming in. Well, it's not right on the midpoint anymore, right? So the closer I zoom in, the more off it gets. So this is not what we want. Furthermore, if I looked at the top end, oh wait, it's a little bit short. It's actually off by a little bit more. And before you know it, it's nowhere close. So we really want to make sure that we use those snaps to confirm that we are right, in fact, on the line. And no matter how much I zoom in, this is always going to meet precisely at that point. So there we are. So I'm going to use the same offset tool that we used before. So I have this line in the middle. I'm going to offset it by half the width of the door. So if we have a 36-inch door or a 3-foot door, half of that 3 feet would be 1 foot 6 or 18 inches. It doesn't matter whether I type in 1 foot 6 or 18 inches. It's the same value. So I'm going to use offset again. And it says specify the offset distance. So here is where I could type 18 inches, enter, or, right, let me come back and do that again. I could type in 1 foot 6 quotation mark. So 1 apostrophe 6 quotation mark. Quotation mark means inches. A single apostrophe means feet. So I could say 1 foot 6 inches, enter, and it would do the same thing. So it doesn't matter whether I convert it into inches or not. And so now it's going to say select the object to offset. There, I've selected that center object, and now I can choose which side to offset to. Well, we want it to both sides ultimately, so I'll pick one side. I'll pick my line, and I'll go to the other side. So I've now created 2 lines that represents the sides of the doorway. Right? So here and over to here. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and press enter. So now at this point, I actually have to open up this opening so that these lines don't go all the way across. I need to get rid of those 2 line segments. And I'm going to do that using a command called trim. And so trim is available up here. It's called trim. You can actually see it as opposed to looking for the symbol. And I'll go ahead and click on that button. And when I press that button, my context is going to say select objects or select all. Sometimes selecting all is the fastest way, but for the case of what we're doing here, I'm going to go ahead and select my objects. Now this brings up something very interesting. When you select in AutoCAD, it matters whether you go from the right side of the screen to the left side or from the left side to the right side. And I'm going to do a little illustration here. So I'm going to back out of the trim command to show you. So if I select from the left to the right, I'm going to click and select this way. Notice the rectangle that I'm creating is blue. Right? That's telling me that anything that is completely contained within the rectangle is going to be selected. So if I were to go ahead and click here, all 3 of these lines are selected, but the horizontal lines are not selected. If instead I went from the right side to the left side, notice my square is now green. Different square, it's trying to remind you that something is different. When I select this direction, anything that is touched by my selection will be selected. So in this case, everything is selected, the horizontal lines and the vertical lines. Right? So very different. From the left to the right is just what's contained within. From the right to the left is everything that it touches. The one other thing that I'll point out that some people have trouble with is instead of if I click and then I click, I get a rectangle selection. If I click and I hold, I can drag and create kind of a free-form circular selection. Right? The direction still matters. So if I go from right to left, it's green. If I go from left to right, it's blue. Make sense? Okay. So when I come back to the trim tool here, I'm going to say select objects or select all. I want to select everything that it's touching. So I'm going to go from right to left, like that. You see that they're all selected in blue. I'll go ahead and press the Enter key. Now it says select object to trim or Shift select to extend. We're not going to worry about extending right now. We're going to select the object to trim. And when I move my mouse over the object, you see that I get a little box and then I get a red X, and it kind of fades out. Okay? When I do that, I can go ahead and click on the shape, and that line will then go away. Right? I can also, instead of clicking on individual pieces, I can drag a selection through multiple pieces and get rid of those pieces at the same time. Okay? So I'll go ahead and press Enter to finish. Now notice that I wasn't able to trim this piece that was in the center. And that's because it didn't extend beyond any of the pieces. It was just a small little piece. So at this point, I'm actually going to have to select this and then press Delete on the keyboard to get rid of it. Okay? So I now have created this opening that's going to be the door. Now I do need to draw in what the door looks like. So I'm going to use the polyline again. and I'll use dynamic input. Now notice my snap is off, so I need to turn it back on, so I snap nicely to that corner. And I'm going to go ahead and draw a line that is 3 feet. Now it doesn't really matter the thickness of the door. In reality, an exterior door is generally 1 3/4 inches, so it would be 1.75 inches. But whatever you draw it as is fine with me. This is not a construction class. I'm not going to be precise about you having to know this. Right? And I'll draw back another 3 feet here. And then I'll end at the same place that I started. So that gives me the door, but typically in a floor plan we also show the arc or the swing of the door. And the easiest way to create the swing of the door is, instead of using a 3-point arc, if I click on the triangle below arc, I get a bunch of options for different types of arcs. And the easiest one to use is this one right here in the middle that's called Start, End, and Direction. And so all I have to do to create this door arc is to actually click on Start, End, and Direction, and then specify the start, the end, and the direction of the swing. So in that case, it's swinging out. That's the easiest way to create this arc. Okay? So I've gone ahead and I've done that little door. Now I need to draw in the window that's on this wall. And so I'm going to once again go back to the Polyline tool. And this gets a little bit tricky, because we see that my window is 18 inches from that corner over, and the window is 2 feet. The center of this wall is not the center of the window anymore. So what I need to do is I need to start my window at 18 inches from this point. And so I need to use something in AutoCAD to designate my start point as being 18 inches from that corner. And the good news is AutoCAD does this really well, but it takes a little bit of practice to get used to. And so what I'll do is I'll pick Polyline, and I'm just going to move my mouse over this corner. You see that I get that little green square. After I have the green square, I'll move my mouse to the right here. And you see that it leaves a little green plus sign behind, and it gives me a dotted line. Okay? I can now type in a value for an offset from that point. So I could say 1 foot 6 inches, enter, and my line is going to start 1 foot 6 inches from that corner. Okay? And I can then draw a line that goes straight down. Notice that I'm getting another little green snap, and it looks like a little right angle sign. Okay? That means it's perpendicular, and it's going to snap right to the edge of that line perpendicular. And so I'll go ahead and press enter. Okay, so once again, let me go ahead and practice that one more time. I'll delete it. We'll come back to Polyline. I'll move my mouse over the corner and then move it away. And I get a little green plus with a dotted line. And I can type in 1 foot 6 inches, enter. And now my line's going to start from that particular point. And I'll draw this line and press enter. So at this point, I can use the same offset command that we did before and offset this line by 2 feet. I could also, and this is something that you'll learn very quickly in AutoCAD, there's always a different way to draw something. And so depending on what your workflow is, you use different commands. There's no right or wrong way, as long as you end up with the end result. So at this point, I could, once again, set a start point right there. I could come over, if it'll let me here, by 2 feet. And it's going to be annoying. It's going 2 feet up instead. Let me do the offset. And offset distance is going to be 2 feet. I'll specify this, and I'll go to that side. And now I have a 2 foot little window that's there. Now, when we draw a floor plan, we cut out for the doors, because a floor plan is cut at 4 feet above floor level. The windows cut through the glass of the window, but there's still a wall underneath. So I'm going to show the glass with a line that goes from the middle to the middle. Now, in reality, we generally show this with double lines. We get a little bit more sophisticated. But for what you're doing today, I'm perfectly happy if it's just a single line. That works for me. So at this point, I now have one window that's drawn on this side. If we look at the floor plan here, I have a window that's on the other side. That's exactly the same in dimensions. So I could come over and reverse the process and draw coming over by 1 foot 6, and then drawing it, and then doing the offset and drawing it that way. But this is not as efficient, let me get rid of this, as taking this and mirroring it to being over here. So I'm going to select, and again, I'll select from left to right. I'll select my whole window, and then I'll use the mirror command to specify a point or a line across the mirror. Now, it would be convenient if I had the middle of this door still, but I don't. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit and pick the middle of this line down here at the bottom. And I can then draw, and it's highlighted kind of in this orangey color. On the screen it looks white. A mirror line that will then mirror my object across that line. When I click, it'll ask me, do I want to erase the source objects? Obviously, I want to keep my first window, so the answer is no, which is the default. So I just press enter, and I get my second line. Now I can do this again if we look down here at the bottom. Right? I need another window at the bottom. I can do this again by selecting my window, going up to mirror, picking the center here, and going across. Once again, no, don't erase. And now I have a window that's at the bottom. Okay? I can also take this window and I can copy it over. And so this gets a little bit tricky because I need to know the distance of the window, which is 2 feet, and the space in between the two windows, which is 6 inches. So when I do my copy, and I'll select copy, it's going to ask me for a base point. I can pick anywhere, but now I have to type in the value that is 2 feet 6 inches. So I'll type 2 feet 6 inches, and I end up with my next window. I'll press enter to finish. So I now have those two windows. Now, I need one more window that's on the side. And we could copy this window, and we could then rotate this window. But in the interest of efficiency, I'll show you another way of doing it. What I'm going to do is I'll select these windows, and instead of doing a mirror, instead of doing a mirror like I've been doing, I'm going to do a mirror that's on a 45-degree line. And so I'll go from this point to that point, erase objects, no, and I'll end up with another window that's right there. So it would be as if I mirrored across a line that was like that, a 45-degree line. So I saved myself several steps by doing that as a mirror instead of a copy and then a rotate. Okay, so I also need to put in a wall that goes across here. So I can come back with my Polyline tool, and I can draw a line that goes from here to here, enter, and a line that goes from there to there, and enter. And then I need to do some trimming to clean these up. So once again, I'll go back to trim, select objects from right to left, and from right to left, enter. And then I can get rid of that little segment, and that little segment, and that little segment, and that little segment. Oops, right there. All right. So at this point, you have the skills that you need to do the rest, the other windows, right, and the other doors. You do not need to draw any of the dimensions that are on this. Dimensions are just for your reference, not something that you need to copy. When you're done with your floor plan, and I can review this later, but some of you will be at that stage, we need a JPEG of this for you to be able to post so that I get that you get credit. We're going to use the print function, which is available right up here. It's a little printer icon. It's called plot. And when I do that, I'm going to switch the plotter name to be the second to last one, which is published to web JPEG. It's going to make a JPEG for me. I'll use the default paper size. That's fine. And I'm going to, if I were to just print it the way it is, I get this little tiny image, which isn't exactly what I want. So I'm going to specify under plot area what to plot. I want to plot a window. And I'll draw a box around my object. And now it's going to show up as a nice large object. Generally, this is not the kind of export you're going to, or publishing that you're going to do from AutoCAD, because AutoCAD is all about scale, and we want to have the building in a specific scale. But we're not covering any of that for right now. We just need a JPEG image. We'll get to that a little bit later. So when you're done, you'll go ahead and say OK, and then it'll let you save it somewhere, and you can then post that to the course website by the end today. So I, of course, recognize that there'll be a large number of you that have worked in AutoCAD before that will breeze through this and be done. I have no expectation that this is going to take those of you that have worked in AutoCAD before the whole day. It will, however, take some of the rest of you the whole day because it's the first time you've ever worked in AutoCAD, and that's perfectly okay too. So we need to get everybody up to a certain level, and then we'll start doing some more complicated things. Are there any major questions? Right? If not, I'll come around and help you if you're struggling with anything specific.